everyone. Glad to be here in Juneau. This is my first time at the museum, and I'm in love with it. It's beautiful. The staff did an amazing job. And as part of that, I'm excited to share. Well, my name is Ann Polnow. I'm an archaeologist by trade. I'm out of Sitka. My specialty is historic and prehistoric Southeast archaeology. I worked on sites, 9,000-year-old sites on Prince of Wales to the Alaska Treasure Mine, which is just south of the Treadwell Mine here in, oh, there you go. You hear me okay? Did you get the first part? That I'm Ann. One of my most favorite projects was this, the Alaska Treasure Mine on Douglas Island. Um, I'm also the current president for the Alaska Association for Historic Preservation. We are based in Anchorage, but we are a statewide organization, nonprofit. Our mission and dedication is to the preservation of Alaska's historic and prehistoric treasures and properties and resources. Um, we have the mindset that the built environment provides a vital link to the past and emphasizes the continuity and diversity of Alaska. We've modeled our program, like many others throughout the country, after the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And one of our most prolific programs is the 10 Most Endangered Historic Properties program, which is also a grant opportunity. Um, each year there's a list of 10 properties that are nominated, and last year the Naknek Diamond Inn and Cannery was nominated to that list. And this is our 26th year of that program, and we are currently taking nominations. So if you know of an endangered historic property, please find our website, AHP, and nominate by the end of March. We serve as an umbrella organization for amazing projects like the project that Katie brought to us. And facilitated in an administrative sort of way. So Katie came to AHP about a year ago. A year ago in January, looking for a little guidance and support in nominating the Naknek Cannery to the National Register upon finding out that of its closure after 128 years of operation. I fell in love with her vision and brought it to my board, who also fell in love and wanted to support the project in that way and agreed to help her under the guise of the nonprofit administration. I also went a step further and invited myself out to the cannery in Bristol Bay, and because I also am a fisher person. I got myself through school fishing and working in the canneries and whatnot, so it's plays to my heart as well. And then as the vision grew and we knew that we wanted to work on an exhibit to share the stories of the buildings and the people and the whole the community, the cannery community up and down the coast, I was invited to assist as the curator on the project. So the first thing I thought of is, and Katie, we need to get to the State Museum and get some guidance. So right now we are working on, so our first mission is to collect stories and thoughts and ideas from the cannery community that will help us develop this exhibit and be representative of cannery life and the cannery experience. So I'm working on a survey, and we're not taking objects right now, but we'd like to know what objects represent this experience. And so that will be up on our website pretty soon once the professionals at the museum can concur that I'm on the right track with the questions I'm asking. And all of it. It's such a wonderfully collaborative effort, which Katie will explain a lot more about. But AHP is just really excited to be a part of it, and expressing the life of these canneries. It's you're in a remote area. It just develops its own culture, multicultural ethos that it's self-supporting, and these objects will help us tell those stories. So I'm available to answer any questions about AHP, and through these wonderful projects, we do get some recognition and support, but we're always seeking out support for our staff because these projects, the funds go straight to the projects themselves. So we are involved in Pick, Click, Give, and offer you to look at our website and our other great programs. We're working with the National Park Service and the Friends of the Kennecott Mine, Friends of Nike Site Summit. We have a pretty amazing easement program. We've got holdings for archaeological sites, the Kenai Church. So it's so varied, in our tasks, and our mission just broadens with the project scope, and preservation means a lot of things, and in a lot of ways we do it. So thank you for being here, and I'll let Katie explain more about our specific project.
All right, thank you all for being here tonight. You're all like my students. You sit as far away from me as you possibly can get. My name is Katie Ringsmith, and I teach Alaska history, U.S. history, and world history at the University of Alaska Anchorage. I also run a business, which I guess business implies I make money, but I run a business called Tundra Vision, where my objective is to provide history free to the community. So we provide 2 lecture series, one in Mountain View and one in Knik, and there are really these wonderful ways in which people can access their history. And so we started this project in 2015, and very quickly I want to show you a video that was taken by 2 local filmmakers, Sharon Thompson and Larice Eagley, and we have Larice here tonight, representative from Naknek. And this is the film. So I'm just going to go ahead and play this, and then we'll explain later.
And lived in the village because they had job opportunity here that was created by the cannery being here, and that was your infrastructure or your economy. So it actually created South Naknek.
All of the references, you never see the word diamond,
right,
but you see the figure. My theory is they said, oh, it's Naknek, they're 2 N's, and it became the Diamond NM. They considered these canneries to be their gems. I think the NM, since it was one of the earliest canneries, and it certainly lasted longer than any of the others, was really the APA's crown jewel.
This is the White House. Come on in. The superintendent had to have a servant, and they had a way of
You have seen it. If you come under here, a button here, and so the superintendent could call in if he needed anything, and the little bell is in the kitchen.
little bell would ring, and the servant would come find out what they needed. The superintendent's room, master bedroom. Look at the old hutch. That's all the old stuff.
But look at this. This
But
is
yeah, this is
the
beautiful.
tongue and groove.
Mhm.
So, like, just this room alone is representative of a very specific architecture. I mean, these things have been here since I was a kid. Actually doing just little odd jobs as a teenager, and then I started working here when I was 18 years old to work my way through college. and surprisingly, it was the reason why I wanted to become a historian. You know, is that I'm an Alaskan historian, because what I experienced here in South Naknek was very different than what you kind of hear in your Alaska history textbooks. And you know, we're not the end of the road. We're not the bridge to nowhere. We're the bridge. And in many ways, this experience, you know, showed me that we are global. One of my jobs was to run the bin person, and each bin could hold about 30, 40, 50,000 pounds of fish. So the slimers would all be down on the floor in the processors. And also what was so fascinating, and just speaking as a cannery worker, why those windows are so important is you could look out there and know what time it was based on the tide. And there's a reason why those words sound so close together. The old English word for time is tide. They have a rooted word. And so you get this your watch really becomes secondary. It's really that river that dictates everything for the next 6 weeks of your life.
It was a bunkhouse, right?
The famous Bristol Bay fish pew. This is what they used to, in the sailboat days especially. They would offload their boats, one fish at a time, by stabbing them and throwing them into the tally scow.
But look at that, that's pretty awesome, isn't it? So the lines used to go right down into the cannery.
The way that you canned and cooked fish was one thing, but how you cooled it off so that you had a good product was another.
The cans would come out of the retorts, and then they'd push them into here, and this was the cooling shed, and then they'd stack them up in here, and it was a wonderful space because it'd be nice and warm, and you could hear the pop, pop, pop of the cans as they cooled, and the logic was when the tide came up, it would push the cool air from the tides up into the cooling shed and cool down the cans.
Yeah, like 3 boards missing all the way along the whole warehouse for one row of fish. And then open strips that let the cool air come up naturally. Yep.
That again is wisdom of the land that is indicative to this region. I mean, it goes way back. And people being able to take advantage of the surrounding landscape. As far as we know, that was the original saltery. So it would have been one of the original buildings.
It started out as salt packing, right, before canning came along, and so you can see the remnants of that structure.
Mm-hmm.
The structure's still here, it's used for a different purpose, but it starts to tell a story that just keeps going back, goes off in different directions. And
Chinese bunkhouses, and you had the Filipino mess halls, and you have all the different fishermen who were kind of grouped into their various ethnicities too. The native bunkhouse too, the map shows that. Even though we evolved and we changed, the roots of some of those stories are represented in the buildings themselves. That's why this is important, because those stories may not exist in an archive. Maybe most of those people have passed on and those stories taken with them, but they're still here in these buildings, and that's another reason why they matter. You can still get a sense of who worked here. Even the machines that aren't used anymore tell this kind of larger story. And I guess even the cannery itself becomes its own kind of ecosystem. When you think of the tides rising and falling 22 feet twice a day, and 24-hour light, had machinery going all the time, but it had a life of its own, and the people who worked, and that energy was truly pretty significant. It was tapping into again something even bigger. And I think that's really what makes this effort so much fun. It's not just preserving the story of industry, it's preserving the story of how we connect to our place. That is the NN Cannery project in a nutshell. So this project, and by the way, thank you all for coming tonight, and we couldn't be more thrilled to be here in Juneau, and we couldn't be more thrilled to be working with your fantastic museum, which of course is the Alaska State Museum. And so this is a story that, is an Alaskan story, and so we couldn't be more thrilled. This project started in 2015 at a history conference. Many of you were actually in attendance there in Cordova. And it was at this conference where word came through the crowd that Trident Seafoods, the now owner of this particular cannery, had decided to permanently close the cannery. And this had great meaning to me because this cannery, as I mentioned, I grew up here. My father was the longtime superintendent. And when he retired in 1997, that was it. He really represented the last of the APA superintendents. And so this was a big deal. And Bob King and I were there, and we thought, what can we do? And we decided to act. Bristol Bay connected an extensive community of people to the global web, and its closure really marked the end of an era. And at this meeting, we decided to do something about this. We put together a group of like-minded people, Alaska historians and archaeologists, curators, cultural bearers, filmmakers, from places like Sitka to Bristol Bay, and we came together in this unified front. We called ourselves the NN Cannery History Team, and our mission was simply to preserve the history of this 128-year-old cannery, the NN Cannery at South Naknek. The NN Cannery originated as a saltery. It was built by Arctic Packing Company in 1890 near the mouth of the Naknek River, one of the 5 major rivers that constitute the very famous Bristol Bay red salmon fishery. It was hardly the first fishing-related property constructed in Bristol Bay. The resource-rich Naknek region had attracted indigenous Alaskans to its shores since time immemorial. Just as strong runs of salmon supported canneries, the salmon provided a stable resource for native communities. Packers Creek, for example. Oops, sorry, let's see. Yeah, there we go. Packers Creek runs beneath the current structures, intersects the historic property. It stands out for its archaeological potential to shed light on the indigenous past of the region due to its proximity to the coast, confluence with the Naknek River, and as a source of reliable fresh water. However, the presence of the saltery marks the first commercial industry-related structure on the Naknek River. In 1894, the San Francisco-based corporation, the Alaska Packers Association, absorbed the facility and converted the cannery in 1895. APA assigned the cannery the initials NN, possibly, as Bob pointed out, for Naknek. It was surrounded by a symbol, a chevron. This was an accounting symbol, most likely designating at, so the same thing that we use in email. It was at, so E represented Igigik, N at Nushagak, and NN at the cannery at Naknek. And in doing so, APA added the South Naknek Enterprise to its surging control of the aptly called diamond canneries. So expanding quickly, APA dominated Alaska's salmon market, accounting for 70% of the total salmon pack and owning or controlling 90% of its canneries. The industry insiders referred to these corporate owners as influential Western decision makers and empire builders. Before 1837, the diamond canneries produced more revenue than all the minerals mined in Alaska, including gold. They canned enough salmon to feed every man, woman, and child in America 4 pounds of salmon a year. Lined up end to end, these 1-pound tins could have circled the globe. By the time APA and other canneries reached Bristol Bay, The salmon industry resembled bonanza economics that had been incorporating the extractive industries of the American West. As anthropologist Alan Boris notes, canneries transformed this entire area and represented the Industrial Revolution of the North. By mid-century, the industry represented the largest investment of capital, the biggest annual financial yield, the greatest employer of labor, the largest single source of territorial revenue, and became the dominant factor in Alaska's political, economic, and social life by the early 20th century. With the exception of 2 years during World War II, APA operated the Annan Cannery continuously for 87 years. And in 1992, APA dissolved and ownership shifted to the agricultural conglomerate ConAgra, and in 1997, the year of the cannery's centennial, Trident Seafoods, the largest seafood company in the United States, became the sole owner. Now, the Annan Cannery operated for over 100 years, making it one of the longest running canneries in Alaska. Its history reflects broad range of historical contexts, corporate, technological, cultural, economic, social, and of course environmental. Its workscape affected local, state, national, even global activities and people. The complex still maintains extraordinary architectural integrity, and although hundreds of canneries were built in Alaska, very few left standing possess the integrity of location, design, setting, material, workmanship, feeling, and association of the Annan Cannery, which, as historic sites go, the Annan Cannery meets all the criteria for historic evaluation. So today, the rusted corrugated tin, the discarded machine parts, the broken boardwalks, the skeletal remains of bunkhouses are the enduring reminders of the past that gives voice to the cannery people, a community of laborers extending along the Pacific coast and across the ocean who today are practically invisible to the historic record. These were diverse people from different places who found dignity through their laborious interactions and forged a deep connection to the surrounding environment. Their work mattered. The Annan Cannery History Project proposes to preserve and to share the narratives of the corporate owners, the local residents, the fishermen, but most significantly, the cannery workers, whose activities are reflected by and embedded in the industrial landscape contained within the historic Annan Cannery property at South Naknek. So at a meeting with Trident Seafoods in 2016, the Annan Cannery project team pitched 3 project objectives or programs. We first of all wanted to nominate the Annan Cannery to the National Register of Historic Places. There's actually 2 canneries actually on the National Register in Alaska, only 2. And none are actually represented from Bristol Bay. So we felt that that was something to make a goal. The second was to develop a community-inclusive educational program based on cannery lifeways. This is going to be a hard thing for residents to lose this cannery, which has really been the economic engine of this area, and we can't replace it. But we did want to provide a program for the community that could live long beyond the extension of this project, and it also continued that legacy of caretaker. They may not be caretakers of a cannery, but they could become the caretakers of its history. And finally, we wanted to produce a museum exhibit that would share the narratives of the cannery people so that the working life of canneries are better understood and valued by the general public. So again, currently there's only 2 canneries that are listed on the National Register. Neither represent Bristol Bay, the largest red salmon fishery in the world. And considering the historical importance of the canned salmon industry in Alaska, listing the Annan Cannery would fill a gap of the state historic preservation program and set standards for future cannery documentation programs. A National Register nomination would document property, identify its historic, cultural, architectural resources, and explain why the cannery and cannery people specifically are significant, not just to Alaska history, but to American history. I mean, you can make the argument for global history itself. So in October, the Alaska Association of Historic Preservation underscored this effort by listing the NN Cannery on its 10 most endangered historic properties for 2017. And with the assistance of the National Park Service, and a lot of personal dedication, the NN Cannery project has now conducted 2 seasonal fieldwork trips to the cannery where we've mapped the site, we've conducted an archaeological evaluation and historical assessment of the property, and thanks to community residents in Naknek and South Naknek, we've held 4 different community engagement gatherings to discuss the project and, most importantly, to invite local participation in our history programs. So the one thing our project really cannot do is save the actual building. It's going to take a lot more money than what we have. The cannery is massive. It's a massive campus of interrelated structural parts. The costs of actual preservation would cost far beyond our project's fundraising abilities. That said, we are working with historic architects at the Alaska Regional Office of the National Park Service to explore ways to preserve the structural information, at least virtually. Now, the National Park Service has acquired a high-definition laser scanner, and this scanner can be used to help accurately document large sites and structures that would otherwise be way too expensive or time-consuming to use traditional methods. So this is kind of an example of what they can do. So this is an example of the Ellis Hospital, and it provides this kind of a 3D model, and they can go in and scan a building in just a few hours. It actually isn't that difficult to do, and one guy can essentially do it, one person. So it's a pretty cost-effective way to do preservation and to create a kind of model. And what it can also do is bring a massive campus like the cannery complex into a museum, and you can virtually visit this place. At the same time, you can also capture the architectural details that speak to the skill set required to construct these kind of canneries. And that's terrific, especially when you're working with private owners that may not be so willing to give their cannery or any kind of historic resource over, but then we can go in and scan, we can capture the information, we can get the details, and we can preserve some of that history. So this is in many ways the National Park Service interest in this. They have this scanner, and this gives them that ability to pioneer these relationships. And it's pretty neat. So we are going to go out there this summer and scan at least one of the buildings out there. Well, so that'll be exciting. So the NN Cannery employed hundreds of residents. And besides documenting the architecture, the NN Cannery nomination is really going to help capture the stories of the people who actually worked in these places. The NN Cannery hired hundreds of residents, thousands of transient workers who produced more canned salmon than just about any other cannery in Alaska. And over time, these cannery people developed unique identities and stories, which today, although still remain, they're little known or understood. Historically, Alaska canneries served as international hubs long before Anchorage became the 100-language city. In the early days, APA employed mostly immigrants from fishing nations like Italy, Croatia, Greece, Norway, Sweden to gillnet salmon in the double-ender sailboats. And as a result, the industry is often personified by the fishermen, the iron men of Bristol Bay, rather than the processors whose collective knowledge of the mechanical operation, the physical labor of the salmon, they really truly formed the backbone. So, despite their skill and labor, cannery workers existed in the shadows, only to be marginalized, exotified, or ignored by writers, curators, even park rangers in popular narratives of Alaska's most important salmon fishery. So, the cannery's underrepresented communities included two distinct yet interrelated stories. First, you had the Alaska Native laborers whose homeland the cannery occupied, as well as the Asian cannery workers whose custom and traditions shaped the cannery's workscape and directly linked the Alaska cannery to the broader Pacific world. So most of the native residents who worked at the cannery were descendants of Katmai. The Katmai people were culturally connected to the Brooks River and Katmai National Park. Villagers migrated downriver to South Naknek after the Novarupta volcano destroyed South Naknek village and created the Valley of 10,000 Smokes in 1912. Then, just 7 years later, the red salmon crash resulting from World War I's demand for canned salmon drove native residents to seek cannery work. The native story also illustrates many of the cannery narratives that reflect experiences far beyond canning fish. Listing the cannery, for example, would add to the National Register the Cannery Hospital. This would be the first Alaska property associated with the Spanish flu pandemic, which is arguably one of the most tragic and historically significant events of the 20th century. And of course, is a turning point in Alaska history. More Alaskans, for example, died per capita than anywhere in the world due to the Spanish flu pandemic. And by bringing the story of the flu to the forefront, we can articulate the complexities between residents in the cannery, provide a context through which people can historically comprehend the flu crisis while simultaneously heal from the catastrophic residual impacts of cultural loss. With the 100-year anniversary and happening right now, 2018-2019, this is actually an ideal time to broaden public understanding and emphasize historical ramifications of this globally significant event. Moreover, despite the cultural lifeways lost to the cannery in infrastructure, Native people became integral contributors to and the caretakers of the operation. This is something that continues very much today. A second underrepresented cannery community is the Asian crew, hired from China and Japan and later the Philippines via labor contractors located on the West Coast hubs of San Francisco and later Seattle. These workers were hired to process salmon and in the early years soldered the tin by hand on the long voyages northward on the APA Star sailing vessels. The industry's most telling and unapologetic depiction of Asian cannery workers is the machine that was called the Iron Chink. It was a patent name, which was invented to replace the task of butchering salmon by hand, human hands. This was a critical task assigned to the Chinese workers. Machines, however, did not supplant Asian processors, again indicated by the numerous cannery buildings built in the later years to accommodate an Asian workforce, growing Asian workforce no less, especially the Filipino crews. And by the 1980s, Japan sent technicians to extract the salmon roe. A process quickly became the center of the economic activity. In fact, it was pretty much the justification for most Alaska salmon canneries by the 1980s. It was literally their raison d'etre. So despite the skill and the labor and their contributions to Alaska's economic productivity, work activities, and social organization, both Native and Alaska cannery workers continue to exist in the shadows, forgotten by time and history. Collectively, they constitute Alaska's invisible cannery people, a population that is multi-ethnic, multicultural, but poorly understood. The NN Cannery Histories Project then aspires to explain how cannery workers were discriminated against, how they were segregated and oppressed, while simultaneously looking at how these workers and their ability to can salmon shaped our nation's history. And through the interpretation of canneries' built history, the nomination will move these processors from the margin. The NN Cannery Project will utilize the research accumulated through the National Register process to connect cannery workers and the first-hand experiences to the actual workspaces. Drawing from the nomination will develop historic context associated with the NN Cannery's 10 most significant contributing features. So, for example, the fish house and egg house complex, the cannery complex, the historic store and rec hall, the carpenter shop, the mess hall, the Chinese bunkhouses and graveyard, the fisherman Filipino bunkhouse, the laundry, the hospital and the old radio shack, and the management complex, which might include the superintendent's residence and the office management buildings. Our goal now is to concentrate efforts on interviewing former cannery workers, people like the beach gang bosses, the superintendents, the cannery foreman, the machinists, the carpenters, the Filipino boss, the mess hall cook, the patchers, the slimers, all who can best speak to the activities associated with those 10 sites, who can talk about and explain the work activities that happened in those places. And if our pending grant is actually funded, the publication of the interviews will be made available to researchers at UAF's Oral History website, Project Jukebox. However, the good news is that we actually did get some grant funding. In January, for example, NPS awarded the NN Cannery History Project Underrepresented Communities Grant, which will support the project's first objective, which is the National Register nomination, as well as the second, a community-driven educational program inspired by cannery history. This is called the Digital Storytelling Project. The NN Cannery Project's educational component includes a workshop designed for resident youth, which will underscore the understanding that the caretakers of canneries and their history come from the community itself. And in fact, we won't have to reinvent the wheel here. Our intent is to work with Bristol Bay School District to revitalize the spirit of Bristol Bay's oral history magazine, the Utaqua, which was a project created by students back in the 1970s and 1980s. And the Utaqua shows Bristol Bay's penchant for local history and the likelihood of parents, many of whom are cannery people themselves, passing down the value of doing history to their own children, even grandchildren, and again, creating a generational component to this story. Naknek resident Sharon Thompson of Steelbird Productions, who created the video we just saw, along with Larice Eagley, they're going to lead this digital storytelling workshop. And she's going to be working directly with Marie Asma, who is with Sea Stories. She's an educational consultant with Sea Stories, and that will provide the local filmmakers a roadmap needed to kind of facilitate this workshop. In 2016, Sea Stories received a National Youth Arts and Humanities Program Award from First Lady Michelle Obama herself. They did some extraordinary work with Angeli Grantham right here, your very own, at the Baranoff Museum, and they've just done extraordinary work, and I can't think of a better way to engage the young people and take that value of history and direct it towards the Cannery Project. So additionally, we're going to work with a community advisor group through this process to ensure the ethical gathering of stories, and also that they'll be the ones to help supply some of the wisdom to foster the connections between the young people and Bristol Bay's elders and seniors through, again, the lens of cannery work. And not only will the workshops give students an opportunity to learn how to research and develop research methodology, develop historic narratives using engaging and interactive medium, but the work that they produce could serve as a basis from everything from community film festivals to inclusion in the NN Cannery Project's third objective, and that is the Mug Up exhibit here at the Alaska State Museum. So the NN Cannery History Project is partnering with the State Museum staff to coordinate and create a community curated exhibition called Mug Up. How many people here have heard of that term, Mug Up? Know what it means? Ah, yes, you good Alaskans. Mug Up, of course, is this compelling and curious term used only by cannery people. Mug Up is the colloquial word for coffee break. It fueled cannery workers with caffeine and pastries, provided a kind of a rest from the monotonous of the slime line, and monetarily brought people together from all over the world. So in addition to the lap of tides, the squawk of seagulls, the rumbling of fishing boats, the sound of kind of chaos from the dock's maritime activities, scores of languages might be heard on the dock at Mug Up. Put simply, Mug Up speaks to the diversity reflected in the cannery workspace. So to achieve the museum exhibit objective, in August 2017, the National Endowment for Humanities awarded the NN Cannery Project what was called the Creating Humanities Community Grant to revive, to reunite, and to raise awareness for the multicultural community that has existed in canneries, not just at NN, but has existed throughout the Pacific Slope for over a century. The Mug Up exhibit taps into the history of industry produced exhibits from trade shows and world fairs. But with the exception of really compelling interpretive exhibits at places like San Francisco or Seattle's Wing Luke Museum, the vast majority of historical narratives about canneries tend to kind of shy away from the actual cannery workers. To produce the exhibit, the NN Cannery History Project has partnered again with the State Museum, and the museum is going to provide the professional curatorial expertise, the exhibit design, while the NN Cannery will bring kind of the historic content harnessed through the National Register nomination, the community engagement programming. And besides the uniformity of cannery work, we're also going to explore the artistic views of cannery people and how they expressed a better way of understanding their relationship to cannery work. So the exhibit will become a platform for creativity that includes original work, perhaps by artists or poets or playwrights or songwriters or storytellers who have used cannery life and history and culture as inspiration. It may just even, we know a few of these guys, right? Tim Troll, whose brother Ray, of course, both of them are interested with this project and are willing to pitch in and help out. The anonymous cannery worker too. I mean, that's really the voice. And again, sometimes it's just what they left behind that matters. Oftentimes we never know who, even their names. The records to show them as Slimer or Patcher, or how many numbers were hired from certain places. But they still left behind these echoes of expression. And playing, of course, an active role in all of this is Trident Seafoods, the private property owner. And they have given permission for our team to access the cannery. They've agreed to the National Register nomination, which, by the way, they were a little leery of. And then we showed them the video, and they understood. It communicated that, that this was a history and a story that they were proud to tell, and that was pretty exciting. And they said we could film structures and recover APA records that they had stored from the 1970s and 1960s, and are going to allow us to give them over and reunite with the APA collection here at the museum. And they also agreed to the removal of artifacts from the cannery that can be displayed in the museum exhibit. So in the end, some objects may be included in the state's permanent collection, while much of the constructed exhibit will eventually find its home, perhaps in Bristol Bay itself, at the Bristol Bay History Museum in Naknek. That's kind of the plan. Our team will be traveling to places like Seattle and Blaine and Bristol Bay, San Francisco, Delano to conduct research at various APA archives, but also to engage the public in what we call mug up sessions. These are places that we invite the public participation to share their stories, their photos, their cannery ephemera. We can take photos of them and have a documented record. And indeed, the objects that may just be sitting there in someone's basement, they will come from that extensive community web that extends from Bristol Bay to California and cross an ocean to places such as China, Japan, and the Philippines. So tonight's presentation, quite frankly, only scratches the surface when it comes to cannery diversity. The NN Cannery attracted people, Chinese, Japanese, Filipinos, but also Croatians, Italians, Scandinavians, Yunnan, Alutiiq, Dena'ina, Hawaiians, Puerto Ricans, Mexican, men and women, the young and the seasoned. This fellow right here was Sami, and they had a reindeer corral not far away, and they'd come down and sell the meat right there, and they'd butcher them not far from Carvel Zimmern's house in the village. So I finally just want to end my presentation by saying, just how much I appreciate all of the help we've received. A year ago, we thought we were done. We applied time and time again for funding, and we kept getting turned down, and it was over. And thanks to people who just said, don't give up. You cannot give up. People like Bob King right here, who just said, you know what, let's just go out there and just do something. And it's an extraordinary, quintessential public collaboration. And again, we're just kind of getting our feet underneath us, so I'll probably be bugging you for help later. All of you, anyone. We're wide open. So I want to end the presentation tonight with a story about my very first Uber experience. I went down to Seattle. I was heading to actually go to Trident over in Ballard. And I get in my Uber, and my driver lights up when I give him the address. He said, "Wait a minute, you're going to Trident Seafoods." And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I worked at Trident Seafoods." His name was Mohammed. He was originally from West Africa. He'd worked at Dutch Harbor, Sandpoint, and yes, he had actually been to Naknek too. Talk about a small world. And he told me that he knew very little English when he arrived, and it was the fishing industry was his first real job in America. He talked about the extremely hard work, the diversity represented in the workforce there, the relationship between the owners and the workers, and of course each other. He talked a lot about the food, the good for bad, and he also said that it meant everything when working so hard, that food was everything. And he also stressed that he still eats fish after working in the industry for 10 years. But one thing that he did say that really struck me, he said that, working in Alaska's fishing industry didn't make him rich, just happy. And it was a gateway to a life that he loves now. He was able to go to school, buy a car, pay for an apartment in Seattle, which is a pretty good feat. And he even has a girlfriend, which he was really happy about. And he said that, and this is the thing that he said, Alaska's seafood, it pays for houses in the Philippines. It pays for houses in Mexico, houses in Africa, right? This was not just an amazing experience of serendipity, but it speaks to this story. This is not a Last Frontier story. This is a global story. This is how Alaska connects to the world. So all total, we've raised a little over $111,000 to just start to initiate this project. We still need help to realize specific goals, especially if we want to create a traveling exhibit, build full-scale models of canneries, do all the sorts of wonderful things that we'd like to do. But mostly we just want to share the stories of the cannery people. If you've worked your way through schools on a sliming table, if you've met the love of your life in the mess hall, if your grandpa sailed on tall ships, if you repaired the boilers that kept the place running, we want to hear from you. Your stories are rich with experience and culture and history, little known to so many people. So please share your story and be a history maker. And if you have an object, paper records that give voice to these forgotten labors, we want to hear from you. If anything, we can document it, find out what it did, get its stories. Send us your digital photos along, of course, with permission to display, and we will consider it. I think that's the thing. And mostly just give us your suggestions, give us your ideas. Because again, that's where the expertise lies, is in the cannery people themselves. So the plan is to take the raw material, the records, the interviews, the photos, the objects collected by historians, filmmakers, curators, to develop it into an exhibition that will present to the public an introspective, unique, and colorful depiction of cannery people's lifeways and history. To do as Steinbeck once wrote, to open the page and to let the stories crawl in by themselves. I just want to show one last video for you tonight. This is from the University of Washington archives, and it shows really the spirit of Mug Up and this kind of international meaning, how it brings all these people together. It's 4th of July, and Filipinos, celebrate it. They spend weeks preparing for the 4th of July and the games, and then it's a wonderful story that shows how all our underrepresented communities come together here. All right. Well, bringing people together. So thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you for being a part of the NN Cannery History Project. Thank you. All right. Any questions? Yes. Oh, that's a really good question. So, are this? Oh, yeah. Are the stories just about the NN Cannery? The answer to that is no. That's the wonderful thing about the National Register nomination, is that you're looking for the typical, the universal, not necessarily the unique and the rare. And these canneries, although we're going to focus on this particular cannery, they existed, in Kodiak, they existed in Southeast Alaska, all the way down to the Puget Sound. And so what's neat is that the work that they did was pretty universal too. So the exhibit is going to encompass all of these different places. And so the stories, the objects, they're going to reflect all of the cannery community. And that cannery community starts perhaps in Bristol Bay, but it radiates down the Pacific Slope, and it crosses the ocean and connects people from all over the place. So yeah, so we want it to be global. Yes? Yeah, the cannery at Prince Rupert in Canada. It's awesome. Yeah, I actually, yeah. Yeah, I did know about that, and that was one of my inspirations for this project because it would be so terrific to actually, work with Trident to at least preserve some of the cannery. And that was my initial idea, and they did a great job at Prince Rupert. But at this point, well, you never know. I mean, I think there's all sorts of possibilities that it could be, and I think Prince Rupert is a good model for that, for sure. Yes. The Cake Cannery is on the National Register, and a cannery called Kukak, which was razor clam cannery. So it didn't even get up the. And I actually wrote that nomination. So off the coast of Katmai. So I'm really looking forward to being able to use that same application and apply it to this particular cannery. Oh, right. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And it's a National Historic Landmark, too. So it meets that national status. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. And I really appreciate it. If you have any other questions, just come see us. So thank you.